Hey guys, welcome to Marketing After Dark. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I am joined by Shiv Gupta. He is the CEO of U of Digital, which is an education company in the advertising and marketing space. So Shiv is going to help us break down really complex things that a lot of us are probably too afraid to ask, like what the is a cookie and what's a privacy sandbox and why does it matter and why is all this conversation happening around Facebook in the industry. So anyway, welcome Shiv. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm excited to be here, Lauren. Thanks for having me.
So what do we want to get out of today's conversation? I think what is most important for everybody here to understand is that you are in education and you help to take complex ideas and concepts in advertising and marketing and break them down into things that are more simple to understand. So I'm going to ask you some questions and I just want you to explain it to me like you would explain it to your 5-year-old. So Shiv, tell me a little bit about, obviously there's constant conversation going on every day around privacy and changes that are happening from a legal perspective. Can you just give us a little bit of an overview of why people are talking about privacy and what it means for marketing and advertising?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a really interesting topic, right? Because I think, it's always been something that's kind of been in the background, but I think things really became magnified in 2016, right? When we had our election in the US and, shortly thereafter, there's all this news and scandal about Cambridge Analytica, right? And I thought Cambridge Analytica was a pivotal moment in our country because, in the past, people thought about data privacy, again, kind of in the background. And, people would use ad blockers, maybe use incognito mode sometimes, but it wasn't really front and center. And then all of a sudden, we had this election, which obviously had a controversial outcome with a controversial kind of administration. And all of this kind of like harvesting of data became really personal to everybody, right? And Cambridge Analytica was at the center of that because it was like, oh, hey, Cambridge Analytica, for those of you that don't know about it, it's a big scandal where Cambridge Analytica was a data company that was maybe scraping data from Facebook off of profiles and then putting advertising in front of people to, skew their decision, right, as to who to vote for. And all of a sudden, it was such a personal thing for people. And it's like, wait, how did this happen, right? And so all of a sudden, advertising, data collection, all of it kind of came to the forefront and people really started caring about it. And there was a lot, I think a lot of it was pushed by, like pop culture as well, right? So if you go on Netflix now, for example, there are multiple documentaries, most notably The Social Dilemma, right?
Yeah.
And there are a couple other ones that like everyone's watching all the time and talking about, and it's like, oh my God, these companies are stealing all my data and using all my data, and it's so scary and creepy and et cetera, right? Now, the reality of it is all this was happening before Cambridge Analytica too, right? It just kind of, again, came to the forefront through that moment. And, big picture, I think advertising and marketing kind of becomes the poster child, right, for everything that's wrong with data collection. But if we actually get to the heart of what we're fearful of with data collection, I think it's more about, hey, if some folks collect my data, right, and then are able to maybe reverse engineer my identity, well, then somebody could steal my identity, right? And that's problematic. Or somebody could hack into my bank account, and that's problematic. And I think, unfortunately, or however you want to interpret it, advertising and marketing has just like, it's all data privacy now has become for a lot of people just advertising. And I think that's a little bit of a misconception as to like what we should actually care about.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but from my perspective and from I think a lot of people's perspective, it seems like some of the rules they put in place, rules around cookies and what kind of data you can collect from people actually don't seem like they're even impacting or hurting the bigger companies like the Googles and Facebooks of the world, and actually are maybe hurting some of the smaller players and making, even higher barriers to entry. So what is the actual implication of like the regulation, sort of the changes happening in privacy for marketers, advertisers, and even for smaller sort of ad tech companies or the open web at large?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, right? So I think, there's a bunch of driving forces. So first of all, there's, the normal consumer that's out there that's watching The Social Dilemma and freaking out and calling their legislators or complaining, right? And that's a powerful voice. There are privacy advocacy groups, right, that are a very loud voice, right, that, have deployed lobbyists and things like that are pushing for more regulation around data privacy, et cetera. I'd say the most outsized voice in the ecosystem, whether we like it or not, is big tech. And this is your point that you were making, right? Big tech, particularly Apple, has jumped on the privacy thing as a way to kind of rebrand who they are, right? And position themselves, as kind of like the antithesis of the other big tech companies, right? The Facebooks and the Googles. And that's really smart that they've done that. Now, because Apple's kind of going down that path, they have been the ones that are pushing the hardest on the changes, especially from a software or platform or a browser perspective, right? So everyone talks about, hey, cookies are going away now. Cookies went away in Safari 3 years ago,
right?
With ITP, and Apple got it all started, right? So, I think Apple is a huge driving force. I think the regulatory environment will also come around, and they will pass data privacy regulation. Obviously, it's already happened in the EU, and it's happened in California.
Sure.
But I think that big tech, to your point that you were making earlier, big tech has an advantage in a bunch of different ways here, even though the original intent, like with Cambridge Analytica, for example, was, hey, Facebook screwed up. Right. Facebook is the one that should be liable. But with everything that's going on, Facebook's actually going to come out of this looking pretty good, right? And it's because, I think there's a bunch of reasons. I think the Apple thing is one reason. I also think that big tech, they just have so many monopolistic advantages that anytime anything happens, right, around any area of the industry, they are able strategically to somehow turn it in their favor. And that's what they're doing here. The other thing I'll say there is, go for it.
Can I get a prediction from you?
Yeah, sure.
What do you think the implications will be on Facebook on some of the news that's emerged in the last few weeks with regards to, teens and the impact on teens with using Instagram and the content that they're served and the way that it makes them feel, all the way through to privacy, all the way through. I think there was a story this week that Instagram and Facebook are no longer going to share user data, which actually might be beneficial for the company and not necessarily for the advertiser. So I would love your thoughts on, from a Facebook perspective. Does the stock continue to just have a meteoric rise? Does it start to correct itself? Do they get regulated? What happens with Facebook in the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the stock has been down like 10, 15, I want to say maybe even 20% in the last, month or so. So they've taken a hit. I think Facebook will be used as an example by regulators as it pertains to like some of this, some of the impact on kids and things like that. And I think they will be regulated. I think they're gonna have to do some stuff, right? Like create maybe an external entity that monitors how they do things. And I think there will be some repercussions there. Do I think the repercussions will be meaningful to their bottom line? No. I think they'll bounce back as they always have. At the end of the day, consumers continue to use Facebook regardless of some of this stuff. Facebook has created a very sticky environment for consumers, particularly Instagram. And if consumers are somewhere, advertisers are going to go there too, right? So the only way Facebook doesn't continue their meteoric rise is for somehow, right, consumers stop using it. And the only way I think that happens is that there's another platform that comes up that does a better job, right, solving for that user need. We could argue whether that user need is a positive need or a negative need. Regardless, it's a user need, right? If another platform can kind of come in, right, and kind of take that away from them. But otherwise, I think Facebook continues to grow, right? They have monopolistic advantages. They're a smart company. I don't think any regulation will be too impactful to their bottom line.
Okay, cool. Can you explain to people who don't know this or don't understand it, like what is a cookie? Why is it constantly in the news? And why do you think we're still going to be talking about it in the next 12 months?
So cookies were invented in the 90s by an engineer at Netscape who basically decided, okay, we have a need to have some kind of memory of what users are doing in their browser, right? Like with the original kind of browser, Netscape, there was no memory of what a user did. And it was just them. It was a one-way kind of street, right? The user would visit websites and they would get a certain experience, and that was it, right? The website wouldn't really be able to like give anything to them based on any kind of understanding of who they are or a memory, right? And so cookies were invented to kind of start creating the notion of memory within that browser. And really, the original purpose of a cookie was to do things like remember passwords and remember what you put in your shopping cart, right? And maybe customize the actual website that you're visiting based on who you are. And cookies, over time became kind of retrofitted to advertising use cases, right? So they weren't invented for advertising. They just kind of were like, oh, hey, here's a mechanism that we as an advertising company can use, or an advertiser. And so, cookies became a big kind of controversial topic. And sorry, you asked a very specific question. What the heck are they? They're little files that just sit in your browser. They're temporary files, right? So when you clear your cache, all the cookie data goes away, but they store information about what you've done on a website, right? So they give that website a memory of your experience in the past. And that obviously can be used for advertising. So the reason cookies have become so controversial is because they have been this mechanism that just kind of operates in the background, right? Like kind of creepily in a way, right? Like without asking anyone, without really getting any kind of permission of like the type of data it's collecting, anything like that. They're just kind of doing their thing in the background. And so initially the idea was we need consent, right? And we need to ask users. And that's when we started getting those pop-ups about, do you accept cookies, right?
And do people, when it comes to those pop-ups that say, do you accept the cookies, do people accept them?
Most people accept them because they want to move on with their life, right?
So people don't actually care that much about privacy.
And that's why this notion of consent is also a little misdirected, right? Like people may care if you sit down and talk to them about it, but when you're in your day-to-day, just like running around trying to go from website to website and like read content or whatever, you're not trying to sit there and read a whole disclaimer about how your data is used. You're trying to move on with your life, right?
Sure.
And so yeah, most people just kind of move on from that, and that's why consent, I think, is not the right solution always, right? So yeah, cookies have become controversial because of that. But even like, Apple always takes things like to the nth degree, right? Like Apple basically has said, consent doesn't even matter. We think cookies are bad. And that's where like I personally think that Apple takes things too far. They overstep their bounds and make decisions for people and for publishers and for advertisers. And actually like, Apple has kind of pushed the world towards more privacy-centric stuff, but they're doing it in their own self-interest, frankly, right? And that's why I think like trusting them as the stewards of privacy is a pretty dangerous game for us to be playing.
Got it. Okay. So what is like a better solution if it's not consent and it's not cookies on the back end that people don't necessarily agree to? What's a way that people can feel comfortable, protected, and simultaneously still have targeted advertising that makes sense to them? Nobody wants to get an ad for, senior care when you're 22 years old, right? So what's the right balance to strike here?
Yeah, I mean, I think let's get back to like the heart of why consumers should care about privacy, right? Consumers should care about privacy because they want to protect themselves from risk, right? And risk could look like a lot of different things, right? It could look like, oh, my credit report was hacked into, my bank account, my identity was stolen, my credit cards, like all those types of things. Also, some people want to make sure that the government can't access their data, right? And like spy on them and those types of things. So how do we get back to the heart of what matters and then build mechanisms to protect for that, right? As opposed to just saying like, advertising is bad, we need to stop all advertising. I think that's Apple's premise. Right. And I actually think they're using that as a way to like build up their own ad business, ironically. Yeah. But I think I'm not going to pretend to have like the right answer here, but I do think that there are certain things where we can prevent some of those bad things from happening, right? So for example, when, let's say login data is being used, right? To create a semblance of identity for somebody to then serve them targeted ads. Well, if the login data is being collected, right, there's always a risk that the login data or any PII data, honestly, right, could be then reverse engineered, right? Even if it's like encrypted or hashed, it could then be reverse engineered to get back to who is that person? What is their name? What is their address? What is their phone number? What is their bank account number? Et cetera, right? How do you prevent that reverse engineering from happening? How do you make it super ironclad? And maybe the answer is you don't collect it in the first place. Maybe that has to be the answer, right?
Right.
But in my mind, I think to your point, like there's a balance where it's like, I think we could still collect some of this data and do it in a way where it cannot be reverse engineered. It is so ironclad.
Right.
But also people can get personalized experiences. Advertisers can do what they need to do. And more importantly, publishers can monetize effectively, right? That's a huge part of this whole privacy debate that I think people gloss over, which is like, oh, it's all about the consumer and their privacy. And then we don't think about like the flip side of that, like the impact of some of these things that Apple does, which is websites, publishers that are not Facebook and not Google and not Amazon, they get hit by this stuff really hard. And then we're just pushing more and more then towards a walled garden kind of ecosystem where everyone spends their time within Facebook and Google. And we don't want that, right?
And it sounds like the solve is almost like it's not solving the right problem in the right way. It seems to me like most people want to be able to read the information and news that they want, to log into the websites that they want to be able to log into and have that memory, and to have personalized advertising experiences, and frankly to be able to, like, if they use a certain site, like have their data safely stored so that when they log back in they don't have to re-enter. I mean, people want like ease and personalized experiences. They just also want to make sure, as you said, that people aren't stealing their information and data.
Yep, absolutely. And I think the ease of use is probably paramount, right, for users nowadays. I'd say, hey, don't mess with my data and compromise my identity and somehow screw me over is probably the second most important thing. But it doesn't come at the expense of ease of use, right? So that's why it's second in line there. And then third is like personalized experiences. I'd say people want personalized experiences. I wouldn't say like the vast majority of people are like clamoring for it, but it's not good to not have a personalized experience, right? Sorry, double negative there. But I think that would be kind of the priority order. And if we could solve for all of those things, right, which I think is doable, I think we should try to do that. The problem is a lot of companies and a lot of the industry has misdirected the priorities, right? Like they've misunderstood the priorities to mean, I don't want personalized advertising. I don't want my data to be collected, right? As like the top priorities. And it's like, well, hold on. Are you reprioritizing what consumers actually care about because of your own self-interests?
Right.
And honestly, most companies are, right? That they look for their bottom line. Apple looks for their bottom line.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense. All right. So I'm going to pivot us a little bit. So you're in education. And you educate people in the advertising technology world, marketing world. What are some of the things that people are asking you to teach them about? Like, what are you commonly being asked for from an education perspective?
I mean, so number one right now is all the stuff that we were just talking about, right? It's help me understand data privacy regulation. Help me understand what's happening with cookies. Nowadays, it's not just cookies. Again, Apple's on a crusade. So now they're coming after things like IP address, even email address in some interesting ways, right? So what is Apple up to? What is Google doing in response to this, right? How is Facebook going to manage for all these changes? What's happening in mobile versus CTV versus traditional desktop? And it all kind of ties back to this concept of data privacy and identity. So I'd say that's the hottest topic. We're spending the most amount of time there with our customers and teaching learners about this stuff. I'd say a lot of other things come up as well, but somehow it always works its way back to data privacy and identity. So, another really hot topic right now is this concept of clean rooms, right?
Right.
Which is
so what is a clean room?
A clean room is a place where you can take multiple sets of data and you can marry them, right? You can mix and match them, and you can kind of tie them together, right? In a very privacy compliant manner where, there's data that gets matched within that ecosystem, but the data, especially like any personal data or identifiable data, will never go outside of that ecosystem. Only encrypted data will come outside of that ecosystem. And then that data could be used for, activation or measurement purposes or analytics purposes. But the idea is to take multiple data sets and use a clean room to marry them together in a very privacy compliant manner. And I can give you a really...
Yeah, sorry. An example. Could you give me an example of that?
I can give you an example. Yeah, absolutely. So let's say, I'm Walmart, right? And I have all this data on users that or consumers that go into my stores and buy my products in store. And I have a bunch of information about them, right? Including some of them have actually passed their email address to Walmart because that's how they want to get their digital receipt, right? So I have all this information about people that go into my stores, including email address. Now, let's say I want to find those same people online, right? Now, I may go to a company that has some interesting data on users, like their online profile, maybe some cookie data, maybe their device data, some digital data on them, maybe also their email address, right? Now, I may want to say, hey, listen, I'm Walmart. I want to be able to find these people on the internet, right? These people that have been to my store. But how do I do that in a privacy compliant manner? Well, maybe I can, work with a clean room to take my data set and marry it to that other company's data set and use some kind of, let's say, common key between those two data sets. In this case, it would be email address, right? And that matching happens in the clean room so that we're not actually looking at like shiv@uof.digital, like my email address, but whatever comes out of that is like user ID 12345. But now Walmart can actually find the people that are in store. They can find them online, right? Because there was a common key between those two data sets.
And so a lot of companies have done this on their own and have tried to do this on their own, but is the idea of a clean room essentially that it's a coordination across multiple different organizations to pool data?
It can be. It can be. So like, for example, Amazon, Google, and Facebook all have a clean room solution, right? And they're just working directly with advertisers, right? So like Amazon might work with Walmart. Well, that would never happen. Sorry. Facebook may work directly with Walmart and say, hey, we have a clean room. We'll take Facebook data, marry it to Walmart data in our clean room, make sure it's all privacy compliant, and then you can find those people on Facebook, right? Now, there are new companies popping up that are saying clean rooms need to serve a lot more newer kind of data matching use cases because of everything that's going on with privacy. And because you can't just easily seamlessly find people anymore using cookies and device IDs, those things are going away. So in comes a clean room to be able to match multiple data sets together and say to the advertiser, hey, now you can find people on mobile. Now you can find people on desktop. Now you can find people offline. And we're going to be the conduit, right, as a third party solution to do that in a very privacy compliant manner. So you have companies now like InfoSum or Habu that are coming in and saying, hey, we're going to be an independent third party clean room solution.
I wonder if there will ever be a government clean room.
I don't think government can get its act together to like even figure out how to regulate like I don't know, like protect kids from seeing.
They need you to come in and teach them, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, government has such a long way to go to be able to understand technology, right? Like, I think they're actually starting to do a decent job of understanding like some of the antitrust stuff that's going around with like, Google and but they just have, government clean room. I don't think that's happening anytime soon.
All right. I like that prediction. Shiv, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you educating us on some of the industry biggest question marks and things that I think sometimes people are too afraid to ask about. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun, Lauren. Really appreciate it.
And thanks to all of you for joining us as well. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.